but he does believe in our way of life. And, I mean, I was the one who was saying from the very beginning, when everyone was laughing at me, that Donald Trump will never give up power. And he didn't. He still hasn't conceded the last election. I don't know what could possibly be more fundamental to you or anyone than you have to concede elections. And he hasn't conceded the last one. He's plainly not going to concede this one. He now has all of his sycophants around him parroting his party line, which is when they ask them, will you abide by the election results? Yes, if it's a free and fair election, which is another way of saying if we win. You really think this is a place this country should be?
Great point. And again, we're going to play some of her response there because we have several clips to look at. But again, the fundamental difference between them pretty quickly revealed itself. And yes, Bill Maher was one of the few from the very beginning in Trump's presidency to say this guy is not the sort of person to give up power. And some people say, well, he did. He finally left. But January 6th and the overall attempt to steal the election from President Biden is indeed a rejection of the peaceful transfer of power. There was violence from the insurrectionist mob at the Capitol, and it was fomented by Donald Trump. He did indeed shatter President Washington's precedent of the peaceful transfer of power, which is individually by far the most important civic tradition that we have. So after laying that out, this is what Megyn Kelly has to say in response.
I'm not going to defend the election denialism. I'm not one of those people who believes that.
But what's more important? What kind of country do we have?
How about my daughter not going into a locker room and seeing a man's penis?
That's important too. And
How about young men on college campuses getting due process when they get accused falsely of rape?
Well, I think that's a false equivalency. I think these things
What do you mean?
I think these things are important, but you can handle these things through the normal due process of our system. But if we lose the system itself, come on.
But we didn't.
We didn't so far.
He tried it. It failed.
Right. And now he's had 4 years to put in place people who will make it work again. I don't know if there'll be a John Rafsenberger in Georgia, a noble Republican who stood up to him. He thought last time that he could count on someone being just a Republican to do his bidding. And what he found out was that there are a lot of decent people who are Republicans, which is something I'm trying to tell the Democrats all the time.
So again, this is where a bit of Bill Maher's indulgence for anti-woke talking points gets on my nerves. But I'm proud of him for saying, listen, even if you disagree on these issues, these are things that you litigate through the typical political process under the constitutional framework. But Donald Trump is a threat directly to the constitutional framework, which you can't have if you don't have a peaceful transfer of power and a commitment to accepting the results of a free and fair election, right? You can't have typical political discourse and litigation and legislation if those things are compromised. That's a great point. Now, I'll point out, too, that even if I take Megyn Kelly's issues at face value, she didn't actually tie it directly with a vote for Trump versus a vote for President Biden. What does President Biden have to do with college campuses? She has never made that direct connection because, of course, President Biden has no role to play with respect to how college campuses and college governments litigate their issue with the student body. And even on trans issues, President Biden is obviously very inclusive. He's much more protective of trans rights than Donald Trump. But what has Joe Biden done in terms of legislating, situations or bills where Megyn Kelly feels that her daughter would be exposed to a trans person in a bathroom? Again, she fails to actually make the case here, setting aside the fact that these are hyper niche issues. But this is, again, the debate continues. I'll also point out, too, that before I play this next clip, that one thing that frustrates me about what Megyn Kelly said there at the end, which is this idea that, well, Trump failed. Sure, he tried to overthrow a free and fair election. He tried to litigate his way into a second term unelected. He did all of these nefarious things. He fomented an insurrection, but he failed. This is the same excuse that Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher and other people who have obvious issues with Donald Trump say to tell themselves and their audience that it's okay to still vote for Trump because the guardrails held. And again, let's use that metaphor, guardrails, like the guardrails on a bridge or the guardrails on a highway. If somebody plows into the guardrails, either in a drunken stupor or deliberately, you toss them a fresh set of keys after their first failed attempt and say, hey, take another crack at it. No, of course not. You extract them from the guardrails, you make sure they can't run into the guardrails again, and then you reinforce the guardrails. And depending on how, when, and why they crashed into the guardrails, you may even revoke their license and arrest them. But instead, what Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro want you to do is don't reinforce the guardrails. Just trust that because they held the first time, they will hold under any all future attempts to plow through them the next time. And by the way, Megyn Kelly's an attorney. This idea that an attempt at something nefarious, which in and of itself is nefarious, means that you should let it go. How would Megyn Kelly feel if someone tried to use that logic to justify attempted murder? What's wrong with attempted murder? They didn't actually murder anybody. Absolutely stupid stuff from somebody so smart, but more from Bill Maher and Megyn Kelly.
But look, I agree with you that the majority of the Republican Party doesn't believe that. But I do think there's a difference between it was stolen, the nonsense with Dominion voting machines and all that, versus it wasn't fair. And
what wasn't fair? The
election. Don't get me started. What wasn't fair?
Okay. Well, the
How
election.
about the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story? Just for one.
Oh, for f***'s sake, really? Oh, then we're not as alike as you think. That's
Okay.
that's a stupid non-story. I mean, yes.
Says who? There are polls that show some 10 to 12% of the electorate says they would have changed their mind had they seen it, had they known about it.
It wasn't right. It wasn't right to suppress it, but nobody gives a f*** about Hunter Biden's
When you
dick.
say nobody, you're talking about yourself. I'm telling you, there are data to
Those
show
are
people
all-
did care. They said they would have changed their vote.
Nobody who was going to vote for Trump anyway, or Biden anyway. I mean,
It wasn't about Hunter Biden's man parts. It was about the scandal of his corruption and his dad's corruption. Bill, I used to think that Hunter Biden was a hot mess and Joe Biden was embarrassed by him but had to deal. Now I really think he was doing Joe Biden's bidding. Joe Biden is the bad guy who sent his drug-addled son out there to collect money. That's what the laptop shows.
And that's more important than what I was bringing up about not abiding by election results, not respecting what always